They were stars, but America wanted them gone. They smiled through rouge and cigarette smoke. They signed autographs with shaking hands. Their faces lit up the silver screen, but behind it, the whispers were deadly. These weren't villains in scripts. They were villains in life, or so the town believed. Some were hated for their politics, others for their passions. Some broke rules, others hearts. But all 10 of these Hollywood figures became the center of rage, scandal, betrayal, or, worst of all, shame. Not the kind whispered in parlors, but shouted in newspapers and etched in contracts torn in half. In a world where 1 million adored you, it only took 12 to end you. These are the stars who weren't just abandoned, they were hunted, hated, and buried beneath the glamour. One by one, their lights went out. But before they did, the world made sure to watch. Number 10. Jeanne Muir, the silenced starlet whose politics got her erased. The year was 1950, and Jeanne Muir's name vanished like mist from the opening credits of a television show she was set to star in. It was not due to a failed audition, a box office flop, or any scandal involving pearls and lovers. It was because she had signed her name on the wrong list. Jeanne Muir, at first glance, was an actress who exuded the reserved, well-bred demeanor studios adored in their leading ladies. Born in 1911, she carved her place quietly in films like As the Earth Turns and Desirable. She was elegant, even-tempered, and rarely made headlines. But in the backdrop of America's rising Cold War hysteria, her name would become a warning shot, a symbol of Hollywood's silent erasure machine. In 1950, Muir was cast in the new TV series The Aldrich Family. The show hadn't even aired when an organization known as Counterattack, a right-wing newsletter, printed her name in a pamphlet titled Red Channels. The reason? She'd once supported liberal causes, joined arts councils, and signed petitions opposing fascism in Europe. The industry didn't ask for explanations. They didn't ask at all. Within days, the sponsor of the Aldrich family, General Foods, withdrew their support. She was dropped from the series overnight. Flashback to Jean alone in her apartment. Newspapers splayed across the floor, phone calls going unanswered. She wasn't guilty of espionage or sedition, only of being a woman with political conscience in a town that had weaponized silence. The whispers started and they stuck. Communist, troublemaker, un-American. Her fellow actors didn't rally, friends withdrew, work dried up like a faucet abruptly turned off. And like many victims of Hollywood's Red Scare, Muir's career never recovered. Yet what makes Jeanne Muir's case especially haunting is how quietly it happened. There were no screaming tabloids, no camera chases, just a name on a list, and then nothing. Today, Jeanne Muir is remembered more for what was taken from her than what she was allowed to leave behind. She became a case study in moral panic and cowardice, and though she would later teach drama and stage work in Vermont, her screen presence had been permanently shadowed. She never begged to be adored, but she never expected to be erased. In the harsh light of 1950s patriotism, Jeanne Muir became an accidental symbol of the system's cruelty, not hated by the public, but hated into disappearance by the men behind the curtain. Number 9. Mary Miles Minter, the ingenue who fell into a murder scandal. She was supposed to be the next Mary Pickford, a golden-curled darling with a porcelain face and a studio-manufactured innocence. By 1922, Mary Miles Minter had starred in over 50 films. She had the soft voice of a debutante and the tragic eyes of a girl always a little too close to heartbreak. But the real heartbreak, the one that ended her career forever, wasn't in a script. It was in a murder file. Mary was only 20 when her name was splashed across headlines nationwide, not for a new film, but for the killing of her mentor, director William Desmond Taylor. Taylor was found dead in his Los Angeles bungalow with a bullet in his back. No sign of struggle, no weapon, just a body, a neat little room, and the stink of Hollywood secrets bubbling to the surface. Mary Miles Minter was the first name investigators locked on. She had been in love with Taylor, perhaps obsessed. Love letters were discovered. Silk lingerie reportedly embroidered with his initials. It was the kind of thing that turned a sweet starlet into a scandalous harlot overnight. Mary insisted it was innocent, romantic, unreturned affection. The press didn't care. They smelled blood, Then came her mother, Charlotte Shelby, a domineering stage matriarch with a rumored temper and a possible motive. Some believed it was she who shot Taylor, jealous or fearful that the affair would ruin her daughter's future. That theory never went to trial. No one was ever charged, but it didn't matter. Mary Miles Minter had been pulled into a maelstrom that public sentiment wouldn't forgive. Flashed to her face at a press conference, young, bewildered, barely understanding that her own silence was being weaponized. Every tear looked like guilt, every blink a signal. She was never officially implicated, but in the court of public opinion, her innocence was lost forever. Studios dropped her, fans withdrew. Scripts vanished. She made a couple more films, but the audiences had turned. To them, she wasn't the innocent girl anymore. She was the girl who had loved a dead man, maybe even helped bury him. She left Hollywood by 1924. Not even 30, she lived quietly for the rest of her life, reclusive, shadowed. She always insisted on her innocence, and maybe she truly was. But the hate didn't need a conviction. All it needed was a headline, and a pretty face to point the finger at. Number 8. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, the fallen clown of Hollywood. Once upon a time, Roscoe Arbuckle was America's favorite clown. He was not just a star, he was the first screen comedian to sign $1 million contract. In a world of silent films, his body was the joke, the joy, the spectacle. He defied gravity, and then gravity took revenge. But the fall wasn't comic, it was catastrophic. Labor Day weekend, 1921, The Saint, Francis Hotel in San Francisco. Arbuckle and a few friends rented 3 rooms. There was bootleg liquor, jazz, and young women. By morning, 26-year-old starlet Virginia Rapp was writhing in pain, screaming that someone had hurt her. 4 days later, she was dead. The finger was pointed squarely at Arbuckle. The press exploded. "Fatty kills actress," shouted one paper. They didn't wait for the facts. They wanted a villain. And Roscoe, with his bulk, his smile, and his bank account, was perfect. The charges were graphic, monstrous, that he had sexually assaulted her, that his weight crushed her, that he was a drunk, a brute, a monster in the mask of a clown. The studios recoiled. His films were pulled. His friends vanished. He was blacklisted before he ever stepped into a courtroom. He stood trial not once, not twice, but 3 times. The first 2 ended in hung juries. The third brought an acquittal and even an apology from the jury declaring there was not the slightest proof of any act of which Roscoe Arbuckle was accused. But it was too late. Flashback. Roscoe sitting alone. Post-verdict. Silent. The joy gone from his eyes. His laughter became a memory, one the public no longer wanted to hear. The damage was irreversible. Studios wouldn't touch him. Theaters refused to show his films. His name was toxic. He tried to come back under a pseudonym, Will Be Good, but it was a shadow of what had been. Behind the scenes, he was haunted, not just by the accusation, but by the speed at which the world had turned on him. He had once been adored by millions. Now he was a pariah, a punchline with no setup. In 1933, just after finally signing a new contract with Warner Brothers to make a comeback in talkies, Roscoe Arbuckle died of a heart attack in his sleep. He was 46. He had never been convicted, but he had been condemned. Public hatred doesn't wait for the gavel. It only needs a headline and an image to twist. Number 7. Lupe Velez, the Spitfire they loved to hate. She arrived in Hollywood like a flame, bright, untamed, and impossible to ignore. Lupe Velez, the Mexican Spitfire, didn't ask for permission. She burst onto the screen with a tempestuous charm that made her irresistible, and a volcanic temper that made her infamous. Audiences adored her wild energy. Studios feared it. Hollywood never quite knew what to do with Lupe. Born in San Luis Potosí, Mexico, she was one of the first major Latina actresses in the industry. But she was never given the roles she deserved, only the ones that made her seem exotic, loud, unpredictable. And Lupe, for her part, didn't hide her fury over it. She clashed with directors. She cursed in interviews. She walked off sets. She threw plates, screamed at lovers in public, and once famously slapped an executive across the face at a party. The town labeled her hysterical, wild, ungrateful. But no one asked why a woman with her talent was constantly handed scraps, while lesser stars were handed leads. Her love life became tabloid gold. A tumultuous, very public romance with Gary Cooper turned into a vicious, humiliating breakup, after his mother reportedly disapproved of Lupe's race and temperament. When he left her, Lupe fell apart. Still, she clawed her way back, creating her own success with the wildly popular Mexican Spitfire film series. She played the stereotype they gave her, but on her terms, laughing, shouting, stealing scenes. For a moment, she was back on top, but Hollywood didn't reward women like Lupe for surviving. They punished them for not staying quiet. Flashback. Lupe in her dressing room alone, screaming not in rage, but in heartbreak. The town called her too much. She had been too Latin, too loud, too sexual, too emotional, too human. In 1944, pregnant and unmarried at 36, Lupe Velez took a fatal overdose of Seconal in her Beverly Hills home. The suicide note, real or fabricated, reportedly spoke of shame. Her death was turned into cruel jokes. Urban legends spread that she had drowned in a toilet. Even in death, they mocked her. The world hated her not because she was unlikable, but because she refused to shrink. Lupe Velez didn't fit their mold, and instead of reshaping it, they broke her. Number 6. Ingrid Bergman, the angel who fell from grace. To look at Ingrid Bergman was to see purity personified. In the 1940s, no star shone brighter. She was not only beautiful, she was luminous. The camera adored her, and so did America. Casablanca, Gaslight, Notorious, each film etched her further into the nation's heart as the image of virtue and quiet strength. But Hollywood is quick to crucify the saints it creates. In 1949, while still married to Swedish doctor Petter Lindström, Ingrid Bergman traveled to Italy to work with director Roberto Rossellini. She was seeking more than a role. She wanted depth, artistic risk, life beyond MGM's suffocating angelic mold. But what she found instead was fire. She and Rossellini began a passionate affair, and soon she became pregnant. That one act, one affair, one child out of wedlock, sparked a cultural earthquake. News broke in 1950. The headlines screamed scandal. The public seethed. How could Ingrid Bergman, their pristine ideal, be guilty of adultery and immorality? Her letter to her husband asking for a divorce was leaked. Her image was shattered. Then, the unimaginable happened. On the floor of the U.S. Senate, Colorado Senator Edwin C. Johnson declared Bergman a powerful influence for evil. He called her a horrible example of womanhood and a powerful influence for evil. Imagine, a movie star publicly denounced by the government. Not for treason, but for love. Studios dropped her. Theaters banned her films. Fan clubs folded. She was exiled from Hollywood almost overnight. Flashback. Ingrid, alone in Rome. The baby born. Rossellini's fame waning. Her career exiled. A woman who gave everything for truth, artistic and personal, only to be cast into the wilderness. For 7 years, Bergman lived in exile. But unlike many who fell, she returned. In 1956, she stunned the world by winning the Academy Award for Anastasia. She didn't attend the ceremony, still too radioactive, but the tide was turning. Her fall from grace had become, in time, a quiet resurrection. And yet, the sting remained. Ingrid Bergman was hated not because she lied, but because she lived beyond the fantasy the world forced on her. She refused to remain a projection. She chose to be human. Number 5. Charlie Chaplin, the genius who was laughed out of America. He was the little tramp, the man with the bowler hat and the waddling walk, the silent film king who gave the world timeless laughter. Charlie Chaplin wasn't just a movie star. He was a symbol of resilience, of comedy, of a world trying to survive war, depression, and chaos with dignity. But even geniuses aren't immune to public fury. And Chaplin, perhaps more than any other man of his stature, came to learn what it meant to be adored by the masses, then spat out by them. It began with whispers, then with women. Chaplin's private life was a storm of controversy. He had a weakness for teenage girls, a fact the press could never let go. His first wife, Mildred Harris, was just 16. So was his second, Lita Gray. with whom he had 2 children and a divorce battle so venomous it became front-page news for weeks. The court documents painted him as a manipulative predator with twisted tastes and a volcanic temper. By the time he took up with actress Joan Barry in the early 1940s, the public was already watching. When she accused him of fathering her child, the FBI and the media pounced. Though blood tests cleared him, a court ruled against him anyway. He was ordered to pay child support for a baby that likely wasn't his. And then politics entered the frame. Charlie Chaplin, long a vocal advocate for social justice, was no patriot in the eyes of post-war America. He spoke out against fascism, capitalism, inequality. He refused to take U.S. citizenship. J. Edgar Hoover watched him closely. And when the Red Scare took hold, the FBI built a case to destroy him. In 1952, while traveling to promote Limelight, Chaplin received word. He would not be allowed back into the United States. No trial, no charges, just exile. Flashback. Charlie on a transatlantic ship, watching the ocean foam roll by. Knowing the country he'd helped to shape with laughter had turned its back on him. He settled in Switzerland, married his final wife, Una O'Neill, again, much younger. He raised a family and made a few films. But he never returned to the America he had helped build. Not until 1972, when the Academy granted him an honorary Oscar, and he wept as the crowd gave him a 12-minute standing ovation. It was too little, too late. Charlie Chaplin was hated for his contradictions, for being a man who made the world smile, but couldn't be the smiling man they wanted behind closed doors. Number 4. Elizabeth Taylor, the Scarlet Siren who dared to love out loud. She had violet eyes and a face that made nations pause. Elizabeth Taylor was Hollywood royalty before she was old enough to know what royalty meant. From National Velvet to Cleopatra, she was legend in the making. But behind her diamonds and marriages was a woman America couldn't stop judging, because she refused to apologize for wanting everything. Elizabeth Taylor was hated, not quietly, but loudly, relentlessly. Not because she failed to be a star, but because she refused to be a submissive one. She married 8 times, twice to Richard Burton, a romance so explosive the Vatican publicly condemned it as erotic vagrancy. She was labeled homewrecker, husband thief, serial bride. When her 3rd husband, Mike Todd, died in a plane crash, she was still mourning when she fell for his best friend, singer Eddie Fisher, who was married to America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds. The nation was outraged. The betrayal became a public soap opera. She was branded a femme fatale, a Jezebel, a traitor to the American housewife ideal. But Elizabeth didn't hide. "You can't break up a happy marriage," she said. Debbie and Eddie's was already over. She lit every screen she touched, but her off-screen life was what the press fed on. Affairs, divorces, public spats, diamonds the size of fists, champagne on film sets, near-death illnesses followed by Oscar wins. The tabloids couldn't get enough, and the public, despite their venom, couldn't look away. Flashback. Liz alone in her dressing room, mascara smudged yet defiant. She wasn't crying for approval. She never had. She was crying because loving hard and living big always came with a cost. What they called scandal, she called life. What they called excess, she called survival. And underneath the headlines was a woman who cared fiercely. She was the first major celebrity to champion HIV/AIDS awareness when no one else would. She raised hundreds of millions. She held friends' hands as they died. She fought for the sick while still being called trashy in gossip columns. The hate? It never broke her. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't hated for what she did. She was hated for not hiding it, for being female and free, and for never once dimming her brilliance to make others more comfortable. Number 3. Rita Hayworth, the love goddess Hollywood betrayed. She was the dream every man wanted, and the fantasy no woman could live up to. Rita Hayworth was dubbed the Love Goddess during World War II, her iconic Gilda striptease immortalized on posters pinned to barracks and bedroom walls alike. But the real woman behind the glittering image? She was quiet, vulnerable, a soul who desperately wanted to be seen, not desired. Hollywood, of course, refused. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino, she was half Spanish, half Irish, and entirely too ethnic by studio standards. So Columbia Pictures straightened her hair, raised her hairline through painful electrolysis, and bleached her skin. They erased her roots and created Rita Hayworth, an illusion sculpted for white, wartime America. She played the roles they gave her, the bombshell, the vixen, the untouchable seductress. But every step she took toward stardom brought her further from herself. And soon, the persona that made her famous became her prison. Flashback. Rita, backstage, taking off her Gilda gloves, makeup melting, voice trembling. "Men go to bed with Gilda," she once said, "but they wake up with me, and I'm not her." She married 5 times. Orson Welles, Prince Ali Khan. The latter made her royalty, but even then, she was chased by paparazzi and scorned for abandoning Hollywood. Each relationship ended in heartbreak. Men adored the fantasy and fled from the woman. The public turned cold. She was ridiculed for walking away from contracts, labeled difficult, washed up, too old. One of the most desired women in the world had become an object of pity, then disdain. As her mental health declined, so did her public image. Her later years were plagued by alcoholism, early-onset Alzheimer's disease, and bitter custody battles. The world looked away. They had gotten what they wanted from Rita Hayworth. There was no appetite for watching her fade. She died in 1987, largely forgotten by the industry she once carried on her back. Rita Hayworth wasn't hated because she failed the public. She was hated because she couldn't keep performing a fantasy that was never hers to begin with, because she asked, quietly and tragically, to be loved as a person, not a projection. Number 2. Kim Novak, the blonde bombshell who loved the wrong man. She was porcelain perfection, Hitchcock's shimmering vision in Vertigo. Kim Novak wasn't just a starlet. She was a cinematic hallucination, a fantasy carefully lit and controlled by the men who made movies. But when she stepped off screen and dared to choose love over image, Hollywood and America turned on her with a vengeance. It was the late 1950s. Kim Novak was one of Columbia Pictures' top stars. Studio head Harry Cohn had meticulously groomed her into the Auntie Marilyn. Cool, ethereal, less threatening. And she played her part well, on screen. Off screen, she refused to be handled. Then came Sammy Davis Jr. He was one of the most electrifying entertainers in the world. A singer, dancer, actor, and member of the Rat Pack. He was also black. And in 1957, interracial romance in Hollywood wasn't just taboo, it was dangerous. When rumors broke that Kim and Sammy were dating, the backlash was immediate and violent. According to multiple reports, Harry Cohn flew into a rage. But it wasn't just about image or money. Cohn allegedly feared mob retaliation, concerned that racist underworld figures tied to the studio might act if the relationship continued. Then came the chilling flashpoint. Sammy was threatened, allegedly by the mafia, with physical harm or worse if he didn't end things with Kim. Within days, he married another woman, black singer Lorraine White, in a hasty, loveless ceremony many believe was staged for his safety. The marriage lasted mere months. Kim Novak never spoke out publicly about the affair. Not in detail, but her career dimmed. The press grew hostile, her roles dried up. Slowly, she withdrew from the spotlight. Flashback, Kim staring into a dressing room mirror, the echo of studio executives behind her, telling her who to be, who to not love, what not to risk. Her silence wasn't complicity. It was survival. For decades, she lived quietly in Oregon, painting, refusing to chase the fame that had betrayed her. Only in later interviews did she confirm the romance with gentle sadness. "It was a beautiful relationship," she said, "but the world wasn't ready." Kim Novak was hated not because she committed a crime, but because she broke a racial boundary, because she loved too boldly, too honestly, in a world built on artifice. And though she still walks this earth, history hasn't fully apologized for what it took from her. Now, at the top of our list, we arrive at the most complex case. A woman whose downfall was fueled by a perfect storm of scandal, secrecy, and a town's insatiable hunger to see one of its brightest stars brought to her knees. Number 1. Joan Crawford, the Ice Queen, who Hollywood loved to hate. There was no one like Joan Crawford. She rose from poverty and obscurity, clawing her way through the silent era with a hunger that frightened men and fascinated audiences. She danced, she posed, she begged, she reinvented herself again and again. For decades, she was the personification of glamour and grit. But somewhere along the way, something twisted. Admiration curdled into loathing. Respect became ridicule. And by the end of her life, Joan Crawford was no longer just a star. She was a punchline, a monster, the villain in a horror story that may or may not have been true. Her career was one of iron control. She ruled every set she stepped on. Co-stars feared her, directors bent to her will, and younger actresses often found themselves undermined or upstaged. She demanded perfection, and behind that demand was fear. Fear of slipping, of aging, of being replaced. She was labeled difficult, manipulative, a tyrant in lipstick, but no one ever called her lazy. Crawford adopted 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons, but it was the eldest, Christina, who would forever change the way the world viewed her. In 1978, a year after Joan's death, Christina published Mommy Dearest. It painted Joan as a raging, abusive alcoholic, violent, unpredictable, emotionally sadistic. Wire hangers, beatings, psychological torture. The public devoured it. The book exploded. The 1981 film adaptation made her image all but unredeemable. Suddenly, Joan wasn't a Golden Age icon. She was a nightmare. Was it true? Was it exaggerated? Many of Joan's friends and other children disputed Christina's claims, but Joan herself was no longer alive to defend or deny any of it. Flashback: Joan alone in her penthouse, the champagne glass in her hand trembling slightly, staring at the wall of awards. An Oscar, photographs of Louis B. Mayer. She had earned every ounce of fame, but not a single tear from a public now laughing at her legacy. And yet, for all the scorn, all the hate, Joan Crawford had already done the impossible. She survived Hollywood longer than almost anyone. She transformed with the times. She stayed relevant. She won again and again, even when no one wanted her to. The world may have hated Joan Crawford, but only because it never forgave her for being better than it expected, for rising above her class, for commanding respect without apology, for living and dying on her own impossible terms. She was not likable. She was not soft. She was not your mother. She was Joan. Fame in Golden Age Hollywood wasn't a blessing. It was a battleground. These stars weren't hated for crimes. They were hated for power, for disobedience, for identity, for love, for failing to fit the mold, then refusing to say sorry. They were the sacrifices at the altar of celebrity. And though the world moved on, each of them left behind a warning. Behind every star is a shadow. And sometimes, that shadow is cast not by scandal, but by the world's own darkness. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.